Hey guys, welcome to the SheKnowsArsenal post-match podcast, episode 9. My name is Jessica, and I'm your host. You can follow me on Twitter at @It'sJustCino. And I have named this episode Lucky Draw. I rewatched the game yesterday, and I feel no differently than I did when I watched it live. I think we were very, very lucky to escape this game with a draw. 2-2 draw. I think if you had been in the stadium, having that last gasp, like equalizer would have felt really good and like a release. When you're watching it on television, really for me, it just felt like I cannot believe we just barely drew Palace, but then I can at the same time. And I think this is going to be a real difficult podcast to have because although I feel like there's a lot to unpack in terms of the Crystal Palace versus Arsenal match, and we can break down how the goals happen, the sloppiness, all of that kind of stuff. I think there's a bigger conversation to be had about where we are with Mikel Arteta at this moment. We are, when you watch at the end of this match, and I'm not saying that it's a bad thing, but the way Arteta is celebrating, drawing against Palace, I feel like he's just that type of guy that's like, that's kind of what's expected. We're going to struggle against teams that we should be beating. We'll be bunkered in against teams that are way better than us. We're going to drop points when we probably shouldn't. And we're going to play horrifically against Crystal Palace, be pretty much dominated at home. We were dominated possession-wise. I know we had a higher XG, but ultimately Crystal Palace were the better team, scraped by with a draw. And I remember when we beat West Ham at the very end of the match last season and at home, and he celebrated quite similarly. And I didn't think anything of it, but I feel like this is almost – it's a very significant moment for me where I'm looking at a manager that I feel like if you're an elite level manager and you're drawing at home to Palace, instead of this huge celebration, you're probably doing one of these instead of all of that. That may seem harsh because it's a last gasp thing, but I just feel like it's emblematic of where we kind of are as a club, where drawing at home to Palace at the very end of the match is just okay. It's just okay. That's what's expected. And before the match, I expected it. And we shouldn't be expecting these things. We should want a little bit more. And again, at the end of the match, Arteta talks about, things that he told the players to do and they're not doing them. The thing about leadership, and to be a great manager, you have to be a great leader, is that you can't dictate to people and then them do it. People have to want to do things because they feel like that's what's best for them or that's what's best for their team or whatever. Arteta feels like somebody who, as a leader, tries to dictate to people. The best leaders actually influence people into doing what that person has asked them to do because they want to do it. He's not influencing this team to do anything. And I think that just says a lot about his leadership. If several different groups of players that he's had over his tenure are not doing what you're telling them to do, at some point we need to stop looking at the players and start looking at him, because I don't think he's a strong enough leader to lead this club to where it needs to be. If they're not answering you and they're not doing what you're asking them to do, it's not because they're bad players. It's not because they're rotten eggs. It's because you can't influence them as a leader. And quite frankly, I'm having huge questions about whether or not he has the balls and the experience and what it takes to be an Arsenal manager, because we are accepting some things that are just not good enough. And drawing at home to Palace is one of those. So in today's show, beyond that, we're going to talk about Vieira's project, talk a little bit about how his project looks. I think looking at Palace yesterday, you could kind of see a team that looks very different than the team that was under Roy Hodgson, not just because of the personnel change, but because of the way that they try to play. That's happened over a 2-month period. We've been under Arteta's reign for about 20 months, and we have seen nothing of that level of change. But there's a lot of optimism around the Crystal Palace project. And I think a lot of people are going to be watching that exciting young team moving into the next couple of years under Patrick Vieira, hopefully. We'll also kind of talk about Arteta's his record and stuff like that, kind of decipher that a little bit. And then we'll move into the Crystal Palace game, get into the nitty gritty of why things kind of unfolded the way that they did. I have some great stats from Adam Vogue as well as Scott Willis from the Arsenal Vision podcast. And then we'll take some of your questions at the end. I know this is kind of a long intro, but I have a lot on my mind. When I rewatched that game, a lot of things really just hit me. I've done a lot of research, got a lot of numbers to back my points up, and let's just go ahead and get into it. So it's going to be me and Souls today. Hey, Souls, how are you? Can't hear you. You're on mute.
Yeah, great start. Great start. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, we both kind of rewatched the game, and I don't think you rewatched the game and feel any better about it, do you?
I felt worse actually watching the game again. I was like, because the thing is, when you first watch it, you're watching it with emotions and kind of a tinted glasses, should we say, because it's the first time you're watching it. You're kind of wrapped in the emotions. You're either very annoyed because of what's going on, but then the second time I tend to watch it when I've cooled off. So either I've come back from work or I've kind of just woken up and I'm kind of over. I wouldn't say I'm over it, but I'm kind of like a bit more level-headed. Then I watch it, and then it kind of confirms things, and that's kind of why I watch it. I try and not get annoyed the second time I watch it, because otherwise you're kind of back to square one again, and then you've got to rewatch the game because you're kind of wanting to watch it to see things. And yeah, I mean, we're going to get into it, but the point I'm going to make is what I got ridiculed for, but it is a managerial issue as well as a personal issue.
Yeah, for sure. I think there's a couple of those kind of floating around. But before we get into the nitty gritty, let's talk a little bit about what Patrick Vieira has been able to do at Palace in such a short period of time. I remember listening to the Arsenal Vision podcast, and Clive was saying that there was kind of like a poll done amongst supporters. And basically, it was in terms of the optimism around your team's current spot or project or whatever. Palace and their fans were kind of towards the top, in terms of optimism. Arsenal was towards the bottom. Over the summer or the last two summers, they brought in, Eze, Michael Eliza. They brought in Counter Gallagher on a loan, Michael Gouilly. I think his name is Mark Gouilly or Michael Gouilly, the one that's from
Mark Gouilly,
Chelsea.
Yeah. I know it's
Yeah.
Mark, unless it's some nickname.
Mark Gouilly, Anderson, Joachim Anderson from Lyon, that was on loan from Fulham. And they had a lot of older players on the end of their contracts and walked away for free. And they've invested money into younger players and kind of created this new, interesting Crystal Palace side and brought in Patrick Vieira as well. And I mean, we brought in Odegaard, Ramsdale, Ben White, Gabriel the year before. We have Tierney. We have two really good young English players in Bukayo Saka and Emile Smith-Rowe. We have Thomas Partey. We have Martinelli. Who else did we bring in? Tavares and Lokonga. Why do you think the optimism is so much lower for Arsenal than it is for Crystal Palace when we've done quite similar things in lowering the ages, bringing in good, exciting young players? We still have a better team on paper, but nobody seems to be as optimistic about our project as they are for Crystal Palace.
There's a few reasons. I think the glaring reason is Crystal Palace's expectation is different to the expectation Arsenal fans have, should I say, more than. I mean, the board is arguable what their expectation is because they're not clear on it. We can make assumptions if we want, but they've not come out and told us what is the minimum expectation. Even when asked in the interview, Eddie kind of dodged the question and said, well, we don't really have an internal expectation, should we say. So I think that's one of them. And I think it's the pressure that Arsenal are under because it's been. I mean, you can argue whether their seasons you're a bit more happy about, but it is 17 years of kind of consistent crap. Let's be honest. The stadium move, which let's be honest, a lot of the match going. I mean, it didn't affect me so much because I'm not really a match going goon. I've never been. So obviously, I've never been to the Highbury, so I can't really say what the atmosphere was like in comparison to the Emirates and what the whole move actually meant because I was a bit too young to really understand. kind of what that means. So I can't really talk on that behalf, but I know people were annoyed about it. And then to come to kind of this summer to spend 150-ish million on players that a lot of the fan base doesn't agree with. Um, because let's be honest, even if we signed who Crystal Palace have signed, like let's say Eze, for example, came from QPR, I'm telling you, the Arsenal fan base would have lost its head as well. They would have been like, what the hell are we doing? Why are we signing some guy from QPR? And then if we sign, let's say, Elise, regardless of, I'm not saying every fan, by the way, when I say it, if I accidentally say every fan, I'm sorry, but I just mean a lot of the fan base, a majority of the fan base would have lost its head if we signed Elise as well. And he's from Reading, they would have had that argument for him. And then Conor Gallagher, oh yeah, but he's at West Brom, he's a Chelsea player, he's on loan. Why are we signing him? And that's the problem. Crystal Palace fans are going to accept these signings because they see the potential and they're willing to let them grow. And I think that's the glaring reason why Crystal Palace have a reason to be excited. Whereas with Arsenal, we want the Basumas, we want the Awars to come in, we want the Dominic Calvert-Lewins to come in, the Isaacs, the Martinez, the I mean, the goalkeeper, you could argue who you want in there. They wanted Max Aarons to come in rather than Tomiyasu. Look, that's still a debatable discussion to have with what we need. And I think it's that. And I think on top of that, Vieira, I always knew Vieira would come in and do well in the Premier League. I think his style of play didn't, I think, yeah, at Nice didn't really come through. But when you really watch kind of what he wants to do, is this, he wants to press teams. And I remember people criticizing him in pre-season because none of that came to fruition. And I was saying to people, just chill. Like, this is the pre-season. It doesn't mean much. And now, obviously, he's starting to click when he played Spurs, for example, when he played us. And even in previous games, even the draws that he's had, they're a high pressing team, a high working team. And I think there's an element of Vieira's a respected player. Forget about manager, whether he'll ever be a respected manager. That's a discussion we can have later on in his career. But he's a respected player. He's an invincible. He's arguably one of the best in the Premier League. Like there's a lot of like he's one of the best of his positions. He's one of the best Frenchmen in the modern era. Blah blah blah. So people are going to sit there and listen to what he's got to say. Whereas with Mikel Arteta, let's be real, he's an average player at best. He's not. You don't sit there and go, oh my God, I want to be Arteta, but you will sit there and go, I want to be Vieira. Like, that's the difference as well. It's the command of just the presence of the manager. So, and I think that's it, really. I think the main thing comes to expectation, but also they're willing to have these players, whereas I think our fan base would lose their heads even if we did the same as Crystal Palace.
I mean, we did. Like, we did do the exact same thing. They may not have the same names. It might not be the exact same players, but essentially what we did is we got rid of most of the older players and brought in a very, very young team. And we're playing with a young team mixed in with some older heads. They have Benteke and Ayew and Ward and some of these other guys, Zaha still in the team. We have Lacazette, Aubameyang, and Granit Xhaka still in the team. I think what we have going on is quite similar, but Yo-Yo makes a really interesting point, and I think this is what I'm kind of gathering to is Palace fans, players, manager were distraught with the point at the Emirates. Gunners celebrated, and there's levels. And so even though people are saying that we have higher expectations, I don't think we actually do. I think it's a facade of higher expectations because we bitch a lot. But in reality, we have accepted this level. And when I'm looking at a game where we get completely overrun by a Palace team that looked not only comfortable but confident at the Emirates. And I'm hearing that if we had not gotten a point, we would have been unlucky. We did not deserve a point from that match, and what I really saw from Patrick Vieira's side was that I felt like not only were they willing to run through a brick wall for him, they mirrored Patrick. They may not have the same level of technical quality as Patrick, but what they do have is they were willing to push us around. They were going into tackles. They were really direct. They never gave up. They had that heart and that fight. And I do think players and teams mirror their manager. And I think that we're seeing an Arsenal team that mirrors a very risk-adverse, average, kind of underdog beta mentality manager. And so we're playing like that. We went up a goal. We'll get into this a little bit later, but we went up a goal and then we retreated. And I think that we have to look at these signs because I don't think it's just happening because I think it's happening because of the manager. Vieira is just one good example of somebody that's come straight in and changed how their team plays. And it's clear. They not only are they going from Roy Hodgson sitting back and just defending in 2 blocks of 4, but they also have more possession. They had more possession than we did. And in most of their matches, except for when they played against, I think, Chelsea and Liverpool, they dominated possession. And I think that that shows that you can make changes quickly if you know what you're doing. Rafa Benitez hasn't had both of his strikers for the entire season. They look fine to me. They not only look fine, but they have an identifiable style and a plan under their manager. We have to look at those things. I mean, Arteta's been here for 20 months, and there's still a large contingent of the fan base that doesn't understand what we're trying to do on the pitch. We kind of get it because we delve into it and look at the tactics, but Souls, for you, do you think that when you look at what Vieira's done in such a short time, when you look at what Rafa Benitez has done in such a short time, and other managers that have come in after Arteta, does it not worry you that we're still asking some of the same questions about unforced errors, lack of attack, square pegs in round holes, lack of intensity 20 months later?
It's a tough one, really, because I don't think the pressure's on those teams, and I think they've got the free will to do what they need to do. When you're not, the thing is, when you're not under pressure, you play better. It's like anyone. Like there's certain people who have the natural, like they're born with like a DNA where under pressure they thrive. Some people don't. Some people just completely lose their heads when they're under pressure and they don't play like themselves. And I see that a lot of the times at Arsenal. And I think for me, the thing with Arteta is I love his ideas, but he needs to relax sometimes. Sometimes he just needs to do what he knows, not what he wants to know. And that's the problem. It's just he overthinks it, he overcomplicates it, he overanalyzes things. And I think that sometimes it's good and sometimes it can work, but I don't really get it. I don't really understand this single pivot. I don't understand because the thing is, what if we look back to kind of what our best performances have been, it's in the 4-2-3-1. Bar, let's say, let's leave the FA Cup for a second because I think that kind of tactics works to start your campaign, but it's not really a longevity thing. Whereas with a 4-2-3-1 or a 4-3-3, you can kind of get away with it for a lot longer. So when we turned into a 4-2-3-1, what worked? We had the double pivot with a balance of Thomas Partey and Xhaka. And if, let's say, Partey was injured, we brought Ceballos in to play a box-to-box role. And then obviously in the number 10s, we've had Odegaard and ESR, depending on who's fit, or we'd had ESR off to the left. And then it depends on the game as well. We'd have Lacazette in if we needed to play a deeper role or a centre forward and have two inside forwards instead of your wingers. It all depends. And for me, it's like, well, keep that then. Keep the structure and do what you've said. Bring in Partey because he's fit. All right. We didn't expect Xhaka to get an injury for 3 months. Fine. Well, then what you do is you look at your squad and go, okay, who can do the Xhaka? Not who can do the Xhaka role, but who can play the defensive role. Okay, we've got El Neni. We've got Maitland-Niles. Okay, now let's look at them two. I want to play Lokonga, though. But Lokonga doesn't suit it. That's my issue. And then when you're losing control of the game, don't bring on a player who's not going to give you control in Lokonga. And these are decision-making tactics that I'm starting to get annoyed with because I've always said, bring in El Neni. Unfortunately, he's what we have. It's not someone I'm not a fan of El Neni. I'm not sitting here saying, oh my God, give him an extension. We need him. Oh my God, he's the answer to all our prayers. But what he offers you is that solidity to bring your structure back in. And this is what my issue is. Arteta just needs to find a way within himself just to keep things simple. That's what makes the greatest managers. Klopp, for example, lost so many players. But what did he do? He looked at what the strengths of his players were within those roles and tried to look within his squad to see, okay, who can do those things? Like, for example, Van Dijk, they rely on him to play those long balls over the top. Obviously, he's a great defender, but I'm not taking anything away. Or I'm not saying Fabinho's a level of a centre-back that, Van Dijk is. But what does Fabinho offer? A long-range pass. He's got a good passing range. So you kind of have to bring in those substitutes that suit what you need them to do. And that's what I need Arteta to start doing. Whereas with Vieira, he's not got the pressure when things haven't gone his way to win a game. So that gives the players and the manager the freedom to for 90 minutes to just kind of go for it sometimes. But
But see, that's the issue though, Souls, is that yeah, it's they don't have the pressure, but if Arteta can't handle it and we're not even get those type of results. I mean, the thing about it is I don't think it's an excuse like that they don't have the pressure and it's so much more difficult at Arsenal. We need a manager that can actually do the job at Arsenal. And if the pressure
there's
is
an
too
element I
much,
don't think the players can handle it either.
but see, this is where I think that we've done this for 3 cycles now with Arteta. In the first season that he was here, the second season, and now this season. We have changed almost the entire team. I get that Aubameyang's still here, Lacazette's still here, Xhaka is still here, but we're still getting the same results. We can't sack off the entire team. He needs to be able to influence them into doing what's necessary to win games. Let me read something to you really quick. I keep going back to this because I feel like people forget. On December 20th, 2019, which is when Arteta came into this club, he said, there's some things that have to have a blueprint. We have to have passion. We have to be dominant. We have to be aggressive. We have to play in the opponent's territory as much as we want. I have the ball. I want to attack them as much as possible. I want to prevent them from attacking me as much as possible. That's what Arteta said when he first got hired at Arsenal Football Club as the manager. He's spent almost 300 million since then. And the team that we are looking at fundamentally, whether give or take a Aubameyang maybe or a Lacazette or a Pepe here and there, this is his team. I don't see passion. I don't see dominance. I don't see aggression. I don't see playing in the opponent's territory. And we're 20 months in, and we've seen other managers at other teams, no matter who it is, Graham Potter, maybe even Nuno, Patrick Vieira, Rafa Benitez, doesn't matter, come in and instill their philosophy right away. Right away. It may not be perfect, but we're still trying to figure out, are we a possession team or a counterattacking team and all of this? So for me, I think we're thinking too micro in terms of substitutions and things like that. Ultimately, Arteta never really gave us what he said that he was. And I'm going back to that because I watched the Palace game and we were a team that scored first, did not impose ourselves on the opposition. We're not aggressive to get the second goal. And we actually did the exact opposite, conceded territory and retreated into our box. We did the same thing against Brighton. The only difference was that he was unwilling to go into that. He was unwilling to open up and try to win the game against Brighton, so he shut up shop. I'm worried that we're getting too far into party this, El Neni that, when in reality, it's just Arteta has not delivered on what he said he was going to do. And we're really far along in this. And there's, what are we seeing
I
here?
think that's a difference. When he came in, we knew it's his first big job. We knew he had to say a few things. I don't look too. It's what he says and now for me, because the problem is an inexperienced manager is always going to come in and say things that they can't deliver. That I already knew. So if people are falling into that trap, I'm sorry, that's a problem that you've got to face, because I didn't expect Arteta to attack every team. He's not got the experience to do that. That's a Man City Arteta
So if
assistant
he
talking.
doesn't have the experience to deliver upon what he said that he was going to do,
But
but the way that
we
he's
know
playing
he
now
can't
is not
attack for 90
delivering.
minutes. We knew that. I never expected him to deliver that.
So what are we expecting him to deliver then?
A consistent performance, which is what we're not seeing. I'm not expecting him to attack 90 minutes, because I don't think that's sustainable. No big manager does that. Even Klopp at times has to sit back a bit, because it's not sustainable. If that's what you want, you're going to watch Leeds football every single week. What happens to them? Yes, they play good football, but what happens? Ultimately, they lose and they're a mid-table team. That's just what happens, in my opinion. But what I think is, from what he said at the beginning, I think people look into it because it's easy now to look back at and beat him with that. But we knew he was inexperienced and he was talking absolute rubbish, because he doesn't really know what it takes to manage in the Premier League. And that is, look, we all gave him a leeway, and I've always said, if he gets fired, he gets fired. I'm not going to lose sleep over it. But whilst he's here, I kind of want to see him get it right. And I want to see him at least get the team right first. And I don't think he's ever gotten the lineup right. I think once he loses a player, that whole lineup just seemingly always messes up.
That's definitely
I think the passion and the I think the passion is there,
that's
but
his
it's not
job.
consistent.
I think I kind of get what you're saying, but at the same time, in the midst of us waiting for him to become this generational manager that's going to get the attacking football going, which we actually see no evidence whatsoever of Arteta being an attacking manager. He came in and said that he was going to attack and be this guy, but he's actually proven himself to be a very risk adverse, sit back and let the other team dictate to us and react to what they're doing. I just think it's important to be very clear on what we're seeing and expect some sort of we need to expect something from him, and consistent performances is very bare minimum. He's not even getting his players to do what he's asking them to do. That's a bare minimum as well. And so he's losing it a little bit in terms of it for me. And so I expect a little bit more than just, you know, him to kind of get it right once every 2 or 3 or 4 matches. That's just me, but let's go over some of his statistics. In 66 Premier League games, the first 20 games that he had, he got 33 points out of 60 available, 32 goals, 21 against. Next 20, 30 points out of the 60 available, 26 goals, 20 against. Final 20, 31 points out of 60 points available, 29 goals, 23 against. The last 6 is currently 11 points, 7 goals, and 8 against. So he's very consistent. He's very consistent in terms of what we're going to get. We get about half of the points that we want, or half points available when we play those games. But there's been no real improvement since then. Should we expect improvement, or is it just kind of one of those things where it's like we need to wait for 3 years in order for this and this and this and this to happen? Because looking at those numbers make it a lot more black and white to me that he's not actually improving the team in the way that's tangible for us to go. We can't eat underlying metrics. Do you know what I mean?
No,
I'm
100%.
worried, we can't eat XG. We can't eat possession, but we need to eat results. And so when I look at those numbers, I'm looking at a manager that hasn't really done much in his 20 months so far. And so when do we start having expectations of him besides just not put our players in square pegs and round hole type thing? You know what I mean?
That's what I said. Like I've come. Well, not even to the run. I've always said that for me, if he can't get the team right, then yeah, it's time to go, because he's getting it wrong more than he's getting it right, and that's my issue. And I've even said this before. I go, losing to Brentford, I don't care if you're losing a few players. It's not an excuse to lose to them, especially not 2-0. You become risk adverse and you draw to them. To get absolutely pammed by Man City, there's no excuse for getting pammed. And then for me, the things that started to annoy me at the start of the season were Reece James was constantly getting crossing opportunities, and I was like, why haven't you? It was like, okay, one goal went in, and I was like, all right, cool. Maybe now he's realized, okay, shit, I've conceded. I'm like, all right, okay, and then I was just waiting. I was like, okay, he's not done it. Not second goal goes in the same way. Reece James crosses the ball in, and I'm like, how many times does someone need to do something for you to realize, actually, I need to make a change here? And that's the problem. I think we've given him enough time, and I've always said this is the season, which he has no excuses. He spent £150 million. To this day, I disagree with how that money was spent and how that was allocated, but that's what you wanted to do, so cool, you've done it now. So for me, deliver it. You've got your players, you've got one injury, and you've drawn 2 games. So what does that make me think you can't do it if you've not got the... And we've said this before, Jess, like, unless it's perfect... I'm not even talking about weather condition. I'm just talking about his team has to be his 11. Otherwise, it's never working.
Exactly. I'm just trying to add a little bit of perspective from somebody that wants to really see what happens in these next 3 games, because I think once we get to the next 3 games and those have concluded, he will have had at least 10 games with the majority of, not the majority, but he will have had some difficult situations and some really favorable situations, and a run of results that we can actually look at and discern how we feel about Mikel Arteta. The reality is that everybody's dealing with COVID, everybody's dealing with injuries, everybody has key players missing, everybody has a key player in midfield missing. But the reality is that we give him so much leeway, and 300 million spent, a whole new team, There are no Ozils and Guendouzi's and Salibas and Bellerin's and Torreiras and Kolasinics and Mustafis and David Luiz's and these guys available to blame anything on now. He has his guys. When do we get to say dropping points against like Brighton is unacceptable? Dropping points against Palace is unacceptable, and start holding him accountable for egregious errors that are really going to affect our ability to make it into Europe. Like, I just feel like there needs to be a, okay, now we're looking at him and it can't just be, well, Xhaka is missing. I mean, it's a really difficult one to look at, but when you look at it in black and white, you kind of see that like this guy is floundering. But
I mean,
oh,
I don't
go
even
ahead.
want to give him the 10 games now. I mean, I get why people wanted to give him 10 games, but I think I'm at a point where I've kind of seen, okay, I'm not seeing different patterns anymore. I'm seeing the same old, same old. Um, I was like, okay, I'll give you the 3 games because, okay, fine, you're missing a lot of players. Okay, fine, let's see what you do. Then what happened is, yes, a good performance against Burnley, but it's Burnley at the end of the day. Norwich, it is Norwich at the end of the day. Is Spurs, okay, fine, I'll give you that one. I'll give you that one performance where, okay, yeah, you dominated them. It's not your fault they decided not to turn up in a big game like this. I was like, fine. I've always maintained this, and anyone can go back and watch any of the videos. I said now it's time to beat Brighton. I've never got overexcited. I said let's beat Brighton and break the pattern. Yeah, then let's go beat Villa. I'm sorry, Palace, and break the pattern. Let's just break these patterns first before I get excited about top 4. Because
Yeah.
if I don't see that, if I don't see you breaking these patterns, then I start to lose faith. I'm not expecting him to go on like 40 games unbeaten streaks and win 10 games in a row or anything, but I'm expecting him to beat the teams we're meant to beat, especially when you take the lead. And then to get absolutely run over by Brighton and then have no answers for it, and then to do the same at Palace, where you then made the substitution, which in my opinion was the wrong substitution to make. I start to then question whether you've got the know-how to really get through tough periods.
I mean, the Premier League is a 38 game tough period. I think we have this idea that at some point we're going to get a run of 10 games where we're going to get our starting 11, and like that's just not going to happen. Somebody's always going to be out. There's always going to be some adversity, and he fundamentally can't figure out a way to get past it. And when his starting 11 is not available, he tends to falter. And that's it's hard to watch because other teams are able to get through these tough periods and he's not. He had 6 games to prepare for the Brighton game, or 6 days to prepare for Brighton. He had 13 to prepare for Palace. Jack has been missing this entire time. So like what's going on, you know? So it's interesting, but I did see a lot of similarities between this match and the Brighton match. I felt like against Brighton we put on about 10 minutes of pressure. This time we put on about 10 minutes of pressure. This time we got the goal. Against Brighton we didn't. It was a really nice goal. It was like a Pepe cross shot that deflected out to Aubameyang. Let's talk a little bit about Aubameyang. I thought he had a really, really good game, despite the fact that he only had 2 touches in Crystal Palace's box, which is another fundamental issue with the system and the way that we play. But Aubameyang was all over the place, and I mean that's your boy. So if you want to heap a little bit of praise on him, this is the time. I think.
Actually, you know what? It's not even about praising him. It's just what frustrates me is when Aubameyang is performing, the team decide to down tool and not give him the service. Not because he had the most entries into the box and no one was finding him. And this is what frustrates me. And I've always said that people, I think, got a bit too critical of him because of last season. And I've always maintained that when you've got a family, especially when it's your mum, like let's not be around the bush. When your parents are ill, or especially if you're really close to one of them and they go whatever it may have been, whether it was an illness or something's happened, it does affect you. You're not in this right state of mind. And I'm not saying, look, that's not even about being professional. That's just you're a family man. That's what happens. You're not 100% focused on your task. Yeah, you'll try. You'll go into work and do your best, but it's always going to affect you, especially in football because it is part mentality. And then obviously you got hit with COVID, and then later on you got hit with malaria, and then kind of like the whole season was just up and down for him. So I said, okay, I'll give him the pass because I know he's going through the motions. I said, okay, now 3 home games, 3 goals. He scored 3 against West Brom. He's not having the worst of season in terms of his goal scoring. He's had good entries into the box. He's making good movements. Yesterday was even better for him in terms of he had 2 tackles, which he shouldn't have been making. That should have been the midfield job to dispossess, but they were clueless to where they needed to be. And he had to come into that to just make the midfield not look so vacated. And that was kind of my issue. And he was the one pressing, he was leading the press, but no one was pressing with him. And that's kind of where my issues came in. And that's why when Lacazette came on, things changed, because now he had a secondary man who was not only willing to get the ball and actually be like, give me the ball, but he's also willing to press. Then Martinelli came on, someone else who's, I've always said it, my sort of love and hatred for him is his press. Because the reason why I say that, why I'm so love and hate about it, is because as much as I love him pressing, he does wander off his position, which kind of just annoys me a little bit. But it's cool. Like, it happens sometimes. And he came off the bench, made a massive impact, brought energy off the bench. And that helped Aubameyang, like, to really get back into the game. And he was the deeper of the lot anyway. And that's what annoyed me so much. I was like, you finally got Aubameyang firing and you're going to piss him off again because you don't want to deliver. And that comes down to Saka not being on the right. And these are just the fundamentals I'm talking about. And I think for me, Aubameyang was just, that's a captain's performance. I know it's a draw. We shouldn't be praising him. But him as an individual performance, that's what you call a captain's performance.
Yeah, I think he played really hard, and it's just a shame that we can't seem to get the ball to him in dangerous areas so that he can do what he's actually supposed to be doing for us, which is score goals. I think at Aubameyang's age, he's kind of earned the right not to have to be running up and down the sideline. I know everybody should be defending, but I also think that Leicester has done a really good job of salvaging Vardy's legs by not really requiring him to do that. And Arteta's pretty much done the exact opposite. And I know Aubameyang can do it, but the best possible scenario for Aubameyang is to be in very good positions to score goals for Arsenal Football Club, not playing the number 10 in the center circle. It's hard to watch. 2 touches in Crystal Palace's box is not good enough. And one of the bigger issues last season was that he wasn't getting chances, and surprise, surprise, he's not getting chances again. So we're looking at a system that's not really progressing or improving really in terms of chance creation and getting our killers in decent positions. So I think that's something that definitely needs to be looked at. But Pepe, his one and only real contribution to the game was in that cross shot. After that, I really do think that a lot of our moves, or even like half chances, died at his feet because he was dispossessed or miscontrolled. I think we had about 15 miscontrols as a team, and we've only done that, like, it's crazy, like, the amount of miscontrols that we had in that game. I think Brighton was also pretty bad for that. He had 8 out of the 15. He touches the ball a lot, and he's always an outlet. Him and Kieran Tierney are the most wide in our row of 5 up top. And so they do a lot of our outlets, and they touch the ball a lot, and we kind of need them to take care of the ball. Pepe just really frustrated yesterday, and he was getting fired on social media this morning. I mean, I don't really know how much further we can go with him, because although he was a part of the goal, he was also a hindrance for us to create anything further beyond that. And I don't think you can really not look at that. Souls, what do you think? I'm about to pull up some of the statistics in terms of what happened yesterday, but what do you think about the whole Pepe thing? It's really frustrating because we're very divided as a fan base on it.
That's the thing I don't understand, is why we're divided, because simply for me, it comes down to Saka is your best right winger or your right-sided player. So you play Saka. Pepe will have to either prove himself on the left or just sit on the bench. I'm not even having the debate. And the thing is, for me, I think with Pepe, my issue is the only reason that cross shot, whatever you want to call it, even happened was because he didn't think about it. He just goes, just go for it. And that's why it happened, because even when you look back at it and you look at him, I don't even think he expected to take the shot. I just think it just happened. And when he doesn't think, things happen. And that's why when you play him on the left hand side, in my opinion, that's where he plays the best if you're ever going to play him. And you've got to play him on the left. Why? Because you cut out how much he is able to do. And you kind of make the decision in his play style for him. And that's better for Pepe because when he has to think, he's not really good. He doesn't have the IQ, and that kind of comes down to him being a goalkeeper at the youth academy and not really understanding the fundamentals of attacking football and really creating the intelligence to make quick decisions or snappier decisions. And that's the reason why a lot of things die on him. But also, it comes down to kind of when you're so one-footed dependent as well, where he can't really use his right foot as much. That's kind of where the issue comes in for me as well. Is he has to force it onto his left, or anything that really happens for him happens on the left, and that becomes predictable. Your movement becomes predictable. The way you're going to cut in and out becomes predictable, and he can't beat the first man. And the thing is, I think I sent a video into the chat as well. I don't know if you guys seen it, but he beat the man and then decided to go back. I don't know we've said this before. He does it, but I just found that to be crazy. I was like, firstly, you're in our half here, and you beat the man. And then I don't know what you went back for. Like, he had all the space in front of him to run in and try and make something happen or get a better angle for a pass, but he doesn't do it. And I'm just thinking, what are you doing? Like, I don't want you to be a highlight reel. I just want you to play football. I couldn't give a shit if you went back, beat him, went back, beat him, went back and beat him. I don't care. I don't like that. I don't want you to be doing that. So for me, it's just he either overdoes it or he just doesn't do it, and that's kind of where the issue comes in for me. It's I've told you, it's time to sell him. Just get rid. I don't even care if we get 10 million at this point. Just get rid and bring someone in.
So this comes from Adam Vogue. He basically said that Arsenal have now registered 15 plus miscontrols in 4 of their 8 Premier League games. We only hit that mark once last season. 15 plus miscontrols is ridiculous, and we've done it in 4 matches. And then he goes on to say that StatsBomb has credited Nicolas Pepe with 8 of the miscontrols from last night. That's the most credited to an Arsenal player since December 2017, when Alexis had 8 against Crystal Palace and we won 3-2. So it's one of those where it's like, I mean, I think he had like 96 touches or something yesterday. He had the most touches in the final third for an Arsenal player. And it's just frustrating because he touches the ball a lot. And a lot of people will say, well, he helped us get the 1 goal. But I just feel like there's an element to him where he hinders us from doing other things a lot. That's a lot of miscontrols there. It wasn't just him though, and I think that there's a bigger question to ask on why in 4 of our Premier League games, why we have so many players that can't trap a ball. We kind of blamed it on the Burnley grass and the, Brighton sleet and snow and wet ground and all of that. But fundamentally, I have this weird feeling that they're just not comfortable and they're not concentrating because the system is not working. But when you look at our passing network here on the left-hand side, what you kind of see is that, I mean, Nicolas Pepe and Tomiyasu are layered on top of each other. I don't think those are the right distances. Thomas Partey is on an island by himself. And then you can't even find Odegaard. And I have a feeling that he's this really small white dot right here.
Yes,
He was non-existent yesterday, but we just don't access, penetrate, play in central spaces. We really just are the players that got the most touches are always out wide. The circle size is the amount of touches. So yes, some of our central players do touch it a lot, but it tends to be just kind of like in this area. And then the darker the color is the XG chain, so it's just very like, wow, and when you look at Crystal Palace's, all of the players are dark red, like all of them are dark red, so we really just lack the ability to play in central spaces and to get our important people on the ball. And I have no idea what these distances are between Pepe and Tomiyasu and Aubameyang and Odegaard, but that don't seem like what we're trying to do. Then, Scott put together this final third entries, and I think this really speaks to why we struggle so much. There are no final third entries in the center of the pitch. everything we do in terms of what we want to accomplish always comes from out wide. This is Pepe and Tomiyasu. This is clearly Tierney. Nothing through the center. Nothing. All the red are incomplete. So whenever we tried to access central spaces from central areas, they were always incomplete. And that's worrisome because I don't see so many teams that just pretty much avoid central spaces. When you saw Odegaard, he was standing next to Tierney, and ESR was standing next to Pepe and Tomiyasu, and Party was on an island by himself. What are we trying to accomplish, Souls? I mean, when you look at these charts and see how vacant we are in central spaces, does that not give you some sort of like, wow, like, what are we actually trying to do here? Even in this one, deep completions, we have no cutbacks. All of the deep completions that we have are clearly going into Tierney here, going into Pepe here, but there's not a single ball back into the 6-yard box to try to get a tap in or anything. Like, what are we trying to accomplish attacking wise with Mikel Arteta's system?
The issue is when you have like Nicola Pepe and you have obviously Tierney being your two outlets on the wide areas with Bukayo Saka on the left. The issue that you have is Bukayo Saka, then Tierney, they kind of interrupt each other on the left hand side. They kind of occupy the same spaces, and then Odegaard, obviously, as we can see in this game as well, occupied that same space. So what you do is you limit your options. And what that then does, it allows the centre backs to kind of just hold on to Aubameyang because Odegaard doesn't get into the box, ESR does. And that kind of limits your option into who you can play the ball into. Aubameyang's then having to make a different movement not to get into that sort of final 6-yard box, but he's then having to take the penalty area instead. But then he's overloaded with defenders in there and the midfield have enough time to get back in. But what you do is, and this is why I say it's part system, part personnel issue, because when you then look at ESR and Saka playing on the wings, for example, with even Odegaard in the middle, or if you bring Odegaard into ESR into the middle and you bring Martinelli into the team, what you then will see is a difference. Because I've always said it, what you need to do is be able to draw players, and that's not what this team can do right now because they know what Pepe is going to do, so they're not really threatened by him. His deliveries aren't that great, so they're not really threatened. They'll allow him to do it. They'll know they win the ball. Aubameyang's then isolated in the box on his own, which, look at it, if you're isolated in the box on your own, what options do any of them have? Nothing. So that's why Odegaard then needs to take the responsibility on himself to go, actually, I don't need to be holding hands with Saka and Tierney. Let me get into the box. Or Saka needs to do that. Someone needs to take the initiative and make another man in the box to overload the box and just basically vacate some space for Aubameyang to have. Because the problem that you have is you've got Aubameyang on his own, two centre-backs sitting on him, and then there's no one else because he's the only one making entries into the box. And that's kind of where my issue comes in. And that's why I say once you change the personnel, what then happens is ESR loves driving into the box. But when you then put him in this position here, he's then having to play a midfield role. He's having to get the ball a lot deeper than he'd want to. But if you put him into the number 10 role, then he's a more advanced forward. And then obviously you've got Elneny doing the defensive work. And then you can have Partey kind of being the player on the edge of the box rather than making Odegaard do that role. So I just think once we can get this structure back into this 3-2-5.
Once Arteta gets the structure.
Yes, that's what I mean. Yeah, that's what I mean. Once he can get, because the 3-2-5 has been very successful. Again, I know I'm going to say that when we've had the players, but I don't mean Xhaka needs to come back, by the way. I just mean he needs to play his defensive midfielders in terms of Maitland-Niles or Elneny, or when we bring in another midfielder in, that's then that going to be that role, that lone 6 role. That they can do that. And then what happens is Partey then occupies the sort of outside the box, which is what he likes to do. He doesn't really enter the box that much. Then that means Odegaard then has to take the initiative to run into the box, or ESR, depending on who the number 10 is.
Yeah.
I think that creates you more options. And then if you bring Martinelli in instead of maybe Pepe on the left, and that's why he plays so well, Pepe, because when he then comes in onto the left-hand side, he's forced into the box.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all kind of know that the system is not really getting us the best results. But I think now from now on, instead of me saying once this happens,
Yeah.
once we this, I'm going to say once Arteta gets, because these are his decisions and they're hurting us. He's the one that decides to continuously use Pepe wide. I disagree with the idea that if Pepe is not on the pitch, we don't score any goals. I think we do score a goal if Pepe is out there, but I also think that if you have Bukayo Saka on the right, you have better chances of scoring more often because he's just a better right winger playing in this particular system. And I think we get so like, if so and so wasn't on the pitch, we wouldn't score. But I don't think that's really how it works. He touched the ball 96 times. He was dispossessed like 8 times. He gave away the ball 22 times. So if you think about the amount of times that he touched the ball, if when Tierney crossed the ball to him in the box, he had a better control instead of fell on the ground to try to get a penalty, he might have been able to slip it past the goalkeeper and we would have scored a goal. So he helps us score goals in some instances, but really keeps us from being able to in other instances. So for me, I don't buy into the if Pepe's not on the pitch, we don't score, because I actually think we just play better all in all when he's not on the right. And Adam Vogue put this together. And I thought that this was the best articulation of why Bukayo Saka needs to play on the right and why we need to stop looking at him as this player that's off of form and Pepe's the one on form and all of this, and Bukayo doesn't score goals. Bukayo Saka is one of our best players, and he needs to play in his preferred position, just like Thomas Partey, who's one of our best midfielders, needs to play in his best position. Square pegs and round holes, especially when it comes to your best ball progressors and your best players in general, is only detrimental to the results that you're going to get on the pitch. And we're seeing that time and time and time again. And what I'm hearing is Saka's not good. He doesn't score goals. Well, of course he doesn't, because he's not in his right position. So basically, Adam Vogue did kind of like this overlapping chart, and it shows pretty much the radar in terms of everything that you could probably be doing in these in this position. And Bukayo Saka on the left-hand side is the red. Bukayo Saka on the right, which he's played more, is in the blue. You see his non-penalty goals are so much higher. His expected assists are so much higher. Shot creating actions are higher. Progressive passing distances, successful pressures, everything is pretty much better except for his dribbling percentage. Everything in terms of final action, final product is better on the right-hand side. And I think that Bukayo is a better right winger in this system than Pepe is. If the system was different, maybe things would be different. But I have this hard time like understanding why we should be moving our best player to shoehorn in a player that doesn't even play that right wing position well in basics, like he doesn't at all. And I think this kind of goes back to Arteta's inflexibility and his inability to coach Pepe into that left wing spot. Because I think if he kind of let go that structure of his system and played Bukayo on the right and Pepe on the left and allowed him to play like a second striker, because Tierney already plays like a left wing, then you kind of just, I think it's a better option, like you said, Souls. I think Pepe needs to be more central and have less decisions to make on the ball. And when he's playing on the right-hand side, he's overthinking, but Bukayo needs to play on the right. I don't think he should be being put out of his position, just like Thomas shouldn't be in a single pivot with Odegaard and ESR if they're just going to leave him alone on an island. You know, it's more Arteta than anything in his system, but also just like simple things like not moving Bukayo off of right wing, putting Pepe maybe on the left, or taking him out completely, putting Martinelli on the left instead would really just help. But he complicates things by putting players in positions that don't suit them.
I mean, Saka's been better on the right. Like, we've evidently seen it. One of our best performances this season came against Spurs, and guess what happened? Saka was on the right. He scored a goal. International breaks, he played on the right. Foden assisted him on the right-hand side. So, for me, I don't really understand it. Like, everything that he does right is on the right-hand side. So, I get, maybe you see Pepe as a goal threat, but I just see better football and more consistency within the 90 minutes when Saka's on the right-hand side, getting in behind, being a bit... He is more of a goal threat. Whether his finishing lets him down or not, that's a debate we can have, but he does get into better positions. If not, he assists. like he did for ESR's goal in the North London derby, for example. He'll cut back. He's got more options, and especially this season, one of the things I'm seeing more of him is he's not so left-footed dependent as he was in his first season or last season, should I say. He seems to be using his right foot more effectively than he's ever has done before, which means when he comes onto the right, he's got more avenues. He can cut out, he can cut in. He's a better ball carrier. He doesn't need Tomiyasu to overlap him to be better, whereas if Pepe needs an overlapping wing back, that's why he plays better with Cedric, because Cedric offers him that. Oh, look, I'm not saying bring Cedric back in. By the way, I'm just saying when we look at when Pepe's played well on the right, it's usually when it's Cedric, not when it's Chambers. And there's a reason to that. When there's an overlapping wing back, why does he play better on the left? Because we've got Taney. What does Taney like to do? Overlap. So he feels forced to go in. And once he goes inside, you cut his options. He needs to shoot. Whereas with Bukayo Saka, it's quite comfortable touching touching the and hugging the sidelines, or coming inside and being more of an inside forward, depending on kind of what the situation allows him to do. So that's kind of why I keep saying it to people. If you're gonna play Pepe, play him on the left where he doesn't think as much. Play Saka on the right because you have to do a lot more. Because we've opted with Tomiyasu for at least this season, maybe till January, who knows? But we're looking to bring an attacking right back in. We always knew, me and George have always said, we see Tomiyasu as a long-term centre-back rather than a right-back, but he's going to be a right-back for at least 2 to 3 seasons. And he doesn't overlap as much because his role is to stay back. So what you then do, you don't play a player who can't play isolated, which is what Pepe's doing when he plays with Tomiyasu. But Bukayo Saka loves to have the freedom on his side. He wants to be able to dictate his side attackingly. So let him do that and then cut the angles for Pepe. Say to him, look, and that's how you can influence the game and not need to dictate Pepe, but you kind of shoehorned him into making the decision for him. So that's all it is for me. And I think he just needs to see where it's going right and just leave that. Saka's done good on the right. Okay, I'm not even going to touch that. Pepe's done good on the left. Okay, I'm just going to keep him on the left. If I want Martinelli to play, or if I want ESR to play, unfortunately, Pepe ain't got a side in this team. And that's all it's got to be.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like playing players out of position is not working. And, we can say, somebody needs to be on the left, somebody needs to be right. I understand that Saka broke into the team as a left wing back / left back, but those are two different positions. And what I'm seeing with my eyes is that, Saka is struggling to adapt to being a left winger in this system, and Pepe would be better suited over there because he doesn't have to make as big decisions, and also his crossing from the left would be a lot better. He can cut it back, and I think it would just be easier. I think one of the best offensive performances where it kind of looked like we were really going for the game was Arsenal versus Wolves last season before we got the red card with David Luiz. Pepe was on the left, Saka was on the right, and it just felt better. But again, square pegs, round holes, playing players in positions that they don't thrive. And I think that frustrates players and inevitably ends up where we drop points. But I do want to touch on the midfield because it was absolutely non-existent yesterday. And just a couple of particular performances or lack thereof that need to be kind of spoken about. There's about 91 of you guys watching on all platforms. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel. Let us know in the chat box what you're thinking. If you think, I'm wrong, please let me know. Put your comments up, all of those things. No echo chambers here. Everybody has their own opinions, but Sambi is somebody that I feel like had a tough game. He had a really tough game again. I think most of the people that pretty much struggled against Brighton struggled again yesterday. And Sambi was one of them. I don't think his path is going to be linear because he's coming from a not so great league where he has so much time and space, and he's coming into a really intense league in a midfield that's not well oiled. When you come into a midfield and the other two people that you're playing with can kind of carry you a little bit, it makes it a lot better for a young player to come in and be successful. And I personally think that the on-field environment for Arsenal for some players is a little bit overwhelming because we don't protect them. And so when you have Thomas on an island by himself and Sambi's just kind of wandering around, he receives the ball, he's kind of lackadaisical with it. He got caught on it, and then the second goal goes in. it's kind of just his learning curve, right? We can't really shit on him for it. But what needs to happen with Sambi moving forward? I feel like he almost needs to be taken out of the line of fire and put maybe more experienced players in the midfield like El Neni or even Ainsley, just to kind of give him a moment to kind of recalibrate. Because after the game against Brighton and this game, I think that I don't even know what his true position is. I don't know where he would be best suited. Personally, for me, I think he needs to play as an 8, never as a 6 at this moment because his positional awareness is not right just yet. But what did you make of Sambi? Like, I think he's such a good prospect, but he's had really like an up and down type of start to his career. Do you think it's time to kind of sit him down, give him some rest, or keep him going and let him develop through the up and down form?
If you're going to play him, you drop Partey. That's as simple as that. I've always said it, and I'll maintain this. I don't see Partey Lokonga partnership just yet. Maybe in the future, but the problem is with both these players, and I'm going to group them together because they're fundamentally, I've always said it, they're like twins to me. They legit play the same way. Their style is the same. Their profiles are the same, in my opinion, right now. I'm not saying Lokonga can't go and change his profile and become a better defensive midfielder or become a 6. I'm not saying there's no capabilities in that because it is literally his positional awareness. Once he gets that, then maybe he can develop into being an amazing lone DM. But right now, for me, if you don't give him the solidity behind him, he's not going to perform. And and this is kind of why I say if you bring in El Neni and you partner them with a Partey or a Lokonga, what I'm not saying, look, I'm just talking about who we've got in the team before people think I'm thinking of these long-term solutions. No, we've just, unfortunately, the transfer window shut. I can't bring in players. So what I would do in this situation is bring El, because I do think Lokonga then has the ability, I feel he'll feel more relaxed because when he played with Maitland-Niles, for example, I felt he was more relaxed on the ball because he knew if he messed up, he's got Maitland-Niles to bail him out, or he's got someone behind him to really bail him out before it goes back to the defensive line and they kind of bypass the midfield. So it kind of gives them comfort. And I think that's what allows them to play a bit better. Because for me, what I seen with Partey, especially when his mistake happened, was nerves. I don't think he really knew because normally he'd have an option behind. When he turned, he normally has an option of a Granit Xhaka or whoever is in midfield next to him. But he turned and realized, shit, actually, I don't have anyone next to me. And that's kind of what happened because it becomes so kind of, you just expect someone to be there. And that's kind of why his mistake came in. Lokonga's was a bit different because he kind of just didn't release the ball. He tried to take the man on and tried to resist a press that he couldn't resist because it was a 2-man press. And I think, and especially it was 2-man coming at you from forward, not 2 different angles where, okay, maybe you can then cut this angle and go through the middle. But it was 2 angles like that coming in at you at like a triangle, if that makes sense. So he didn't really have the option. He needed to release that a lot quicker than he did. But he's very young, and I'm not going to sit there and absolutely rip into him. But I do think giving him the solidity in behind him, in bringing in an El Neni or a Granit Xhaka or a Basuma or a Guimaraes or a Kamara or a Ruben Neves will just make him better. The same way Partey looks better when he's got that partner, when he's got that person who's going to do the defensive side of the game and give him the freedom to go up. And that's all it is.
Yeah.
Once he gets that, he'll be a lot more comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just one of those where he didn't have a great game, but I also feel like Xhaka being missing should not be causing us this many issues.
But you
You
bring El Neni, that's all it is. It's not even
but
Xhaka.
no, I mean, I honestly feel like we're almost giving it too much, where it's like, it's this intricate thing, and like he has to bring in El Neni to do this, and like I just honestly feel like Arteta's missing the trick of just coaching players to and getting them to do the job that they're being asked on the pitch,
But
even if he brings
they're
in.
not able to. That's the thing. Party's never been able to do that. Even under
No, no,
Simeone, he's not been able to do that.
no, what I'm saying is that it's not just about positions and like, can you play 6 or can you play 8? It's just coaching people into what they're supposed to be doing when they're on the pitch. Sambi looks lost. Sambi looks absolutely lost. Like he's out there and he looks like he just said, just kind of go out there. And I just feel like Arteta needs to do a better job of preparing people, just like even with Odegaard. I think Odegaard is a very smart, intelligent, technically gifted player that was put in a position that doesn't really suit him on the day. If we're going to be pressed, which I think everybody knows that Patrick is going to press us because it's pretty obvious, then why play Odegaard in the left-sided center mid position and then drag him out so far wide where he's going to get pressed and lose the ball closer to our goal? I just feel like there's decisions that Arteta makes and then he kind of leaves you out there for dead. This is not Odegaard's position, so he needs more coaching and more structure around him. And the funny thing
But
about it is,
it's
hold up,
also an
let me just
instinct.
no, let me just finish really quick, because we know Arteta can do it because he did it for Granite. He did it for Granite. When Arteta first came in, the first player that he decided to bubble wrap was Xhaka, a player that had constantly been played out of position, asked to do things that he wasn't good at. He bubble wrapped him so that he wasn't getting exposed, and voila. Now we love Granite. Why aren't Odegaard and Thomas getting the same thing? Sambi. He can do it. He's just not doing it. And I get that the players need to be able to think on their own. And you can look at Thomas's situation and say, okay, maybe he needs to get rid of the ball quicker. Odegaard needs to get rid of the ball quicker. But the positions that they're being put in and what they're being asked to do are leaving them isolated in midfield and in bad positions. So I think it's the two, and Arteta needs to come up to his part of it as well. That's just kind of how I think. There's no coaching going on. All players are flawed. Odegaard is a flawed player in terms of his lack of athleticism. So if you're going to play him closer to the goal where there's no Xhaka behind him, there's no Thomas Partey behind him, then you need to make sure that he's not being isolated, and it's just, I feel like we're not pressing Arteta enough about his tactics and all of that. He's the one who chose Odegaard. He wanted Odegaard. Why put him in a position to get slapped up? Why put Pepe in a position that you just know is not good for him? Why drag Saka out on the left and leave him in a position that he's not good at? I think a lot of the bad performances can really be drawn back to Arteta. But what were you saying? You were saying it's more.
No, all I'm saying,
say?
like that's the reason why I say it. Everything I've said, I'm not. I just don't say it's Arteta's fault, but everything I'm saying is a managerial fault, because it's a person. When it's a personnel issue, that's what the manager's fault. It comes directly into the manager's portfolio of what he now needs to make the decisions on. And for me, the problem is, even if you coach Odegaard's still gonna have the instinct to move forward. The same with Partey. It's just they're far gone in their positions in terms of Odegaard is an attacking player. He only understands the attacking game, not necessarily how to play that position in our midfield. And he's not a central midfielder. He can play an 8 maybe, but then he needs that solidity behind him. He needs a proper lone DM if he's going to play the 8. But if you then bring in 2 good midfielders to sit in behind him and just let him go forward, then we don't really blame him so much. But because obviously the way that we played meant that the midfield got opened up, it's simply down to one of those needed to change into more of a defensive-minded midfielder. And that's why I blame Arteta, not necessarily the players on the pitch. And I said this solely has come down to Arteta not picking the right team.
Yeah, I think it's got to be a little bit of both. But Odegaard, I mean, I still feel like his performance was not great. But then I look at him and I'm like, do I think he was played out of position? Yes. Do I think he had the support around him? Probably not, to play in that position at the moment. And it wasn't like when we're playing against Burnley when we were pretty much just controlling possession and they couldn't really touch us. Palace were all over us and he was just kind of swallowed up in all of it. ESR was way too far right. And again, I see people in the comments saying that Odegaard plays in the same position with Norway, but he actually doesn't. They play a 3-4-3 and he plays off of the right-hand side. He's playing left-sided center mid in a 4-2-3-1 for Arsenal Football Club in the Premier League against Crystal Palace. Those are 2 completely different things. And with somebody that lacks athleticism against a team that's really leggy and pressy, he's going to suffer if he doesn't have Kieran Tierney bombs forward 90% of the game. So if he's sitting there on the left-hand side, he is isolated and in a position where a 1-2 pass is just right around him. A couple players swarm up against him and he gets the ball taken away from him. And I always, the next pass is never right there. Our distances are not good. It's like Partey gets the ball. Where is the next pass for him? Odegaard gets the ball. Where's the next pass for him? ESR does a really good job at it because when he gets the ball, even though he's isolated most of the time, he can beat a man and turn him in and kind of burst into that space and find a pass. So I think it's also our distances are off, and that kind of goes back to the shape, the system, and what they're being asked to do. But the midfield is just one of those where I think whatever combination we use, will always be a little bit underwhelming because it's just not a very strong midfield, but you have to at least try to play people to their strengths, especially your best people. And right now that's Thomas. And so until January comes around, you need to find somebody that can stabilize that midfield with him. And that's probably El Neni at the moment, and so maybe he needs to play in the next game, which would be, I mean, we're calling for him, and that's pretty, that says a lot. I have written here that our midfield has probably been our biggest weakness for 5 to 7 years, and we keep neglecting it. And it's just something I can't really get over, the fact that we went through that summer window, spent 150 million, and still did not buy a midfielder. And it keeps kind of slapping us across the face, like it's crazy. Like, you know what I mean?
The thing is, we had Awar available at 25 million or 30 million, whatever, reports you want to believe. I don't want to mention the player because obviously what he's going through, but Basuma was available as well for 30 to 35 million. You had Guimaraes available for about 40 million, 30 to 40 million, depending on kind of where you want to believe. And there was many more. Ruben Neves was available for about 30 million. So the problem is we had 25 to, let's say, 35 million pounds, right, which we could have allocated to that position. Now, Lokonga cost us 20 million. I would have rathered this season, and I kept saying it, put another 5 to 10 million in and gone and got that midfielder. And then, because I don't think Lokonga was going anywhere. I don't think Lokonga's one of those which we absolutely needed to, because otherwise we're going to lose him, because he wasn't being scouted that much. Yes, he was. He's a very highly he's a very highly talented player, but he wasn't like, oh my god, like United are after him. It's not a Camavinga situation. It wasn't a Samari situation where there were other teams as well looking at him and willing to pull the trigger. And that's why I said, like, bring in your Awar. Okay, maybe he's got attitude issue. I don't know what it was anyway. His agent, okay, fine, scrap him. Then you've got Basuma. What's the problem with Basuma? Nothing. Then you've got Ruben Neves, which we were basically linked to the entire summer. So even if they'd brought him in, I would have been like, okay, fair enough. At least they've addressed it in their own way. Maybe I don't agree with it as a profile or as a player, but they see something in him. And yes, he is a DM. He is a defensive midfielder. So cool, you've done the job. But they didn't decide to pull the trigger on any of them.
Exactly. And so, again, you guys, if for some of you guys, because there's about 91 of you guys watching right now, so I know some of you guys weren't here at the beginning, but I just want to reiterate a fact that I just feel, or something that I learned the other day that I feel like is very pertinent to what we're talking about right now. Jean Rene, thank you so much for your comment. I just want to go to the end part about, but the players weren't brave enough. Arteta's been saying players aren't brave enough. Players aren't brave enough. Players aren't doing what I'm asking them to do. A manager is meant to be a leader. If you can't be a good manager, if you can't lead a team, period. And the key to leadership is not dictating to people and telling them what to do and them just doing it because you said. You have to influence them into wanting to do it for themselves and for the team because they want to. He has no influence on a team of players. He can dictate to them all he wants, and they can decide whether or not they feel like doing it. If, I know I'm supposed to, so I'm gonna make a decision whether or not, but he does not have the leadership skills at the moment, in my view, to influence this team into doing what he wants. If he wants them to be brave, he has to influence this team to be brave. These guys are not players that you've never seen run through walls. They just don't run through walls through him, like for him. This team does not run through walls for him on a consistent basis. And that's because he can't influence them into doing that, because he lacks that part of leadership. Maybe that comes later on when you have some more clout, people start respecting you, maybe you start getting results. But at the moment, he's having a very difficult time getting these players to communicate what he wants on the pitch for him. And that's an Arteta issue because, again, we went through about 3 cycles of players. None of them are doing what he wants them to do. So is that their problem? Is all the players that we're buying just bad eggs? No, he cannot influence players. He has to influence them to be brave. If they're not doing it, it's because you're not good enough and you need to figure it out. So I feel like we're doing too much of, but it's the players, it's the players, it's the players. It's because he can't influence the players. And that's a part of leadership that he just doesn't have at the moment. We have a little bit more to get through, but let's see. Let's see. Yo-Yo says the window showed Arteta and Adu are confident in their positions. They're going nowhere. Even Murdersoccer's words show standards and exactions, expectations maybe are on the floor. Yeah, I mean, you've been
I mean,
saying that.
Mertesacker is actually here. If I'm listening to him, I'm thinking the expectations are going up. But the other two, yeah, I hear that they are low.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It's not good enough. But the last person that I kind of want to touch on in terms of that I thought had a good performance was Ben White. I do think that his performance has gotten kind of lost in all of the kind of it was a draw and the bad performances. But I do think that he has some good distribution. He was really good in defense and he was blamed for the second goal. And I don't really see how he did anything wrong because if he steps to Edouard, he's just going to step right past him and go into the goal anyway. And yesterday was the first game where I saw a defender that looked like what I was looking for. He was quick to jump in front of his opposition. He was good in possession. He had one really nice no look pass all the way over to the other side for Tierney, and he didn't do a very good job with it. So I think Ben White was somebody that I think if we had to do like stock up and stock down like they did for like Arsenal Vision, he would stock up for me because everybody's looking for this $50 million defender and we may never see that. But what I did see was a defender that was confident, that did the defensive part of it, was absolutely unprotected from his midfield and in some instances from his fullback. And he did a pretty freaking good job. And I can't be upset. Gabriel gets a lot of it because he's just our warrior back there and Ramsdale as well. But I do think Ben White did well. You're a big advocate of him. Did you, on second rewatch, did you see anything new from his performance, or do you think I'm overplaying it a little bit?
No, I mean the goal. I just want to say the people who are complaining about that, I can guarantee you've never played football in your flipping life. So I can tell you that for a fact because he's not only having to track what Edward is doing, but if you look at the clip, he's also having to track what Elise ends up doing. So he's trying to cover both bases, not just the one. And if you've ever defended in your life, you understand that when you're in them situations, what really needed to happen was ESR needed to be a bit more urgent in getting back because you can see as the ball was like as Edward got the ball, ESR started jogging in. But what he needed to do was be more urgent to cut the Elise pass. That's what gives Ben White the confidence to go in and try and get that ball. But the problem is, if Ben White then commits and Edward sees he's about to commit, guess what he does? Slides the ball to Elise. That's your second issue there. And then people are going to blame him. Why didn't no one mark Elise? And that's the issue because he's having to then deal with both the runs and understand what Edward's doing. But my situation in that goal comes from how did they even turn over possession that quickly? And that came from Lokonga. But no one wants look. I'm not sitting here and saying blame Lokonga, by the way. I don't want that to happen. I don't want any of our players to get stick for a mistake they made, especially not the youngsters. But you do have to look at it. It's more a Lokonga problem than it was a Ben White problem. But the reason why they want to blame Ben White is because they never wanted the signing to happen in the first place. And that's the problem. And this is why I say when people talk about their agendas over facts that have happened, and it's the emotions, and they're like, yeah, but he's £50 million, he should do it. Just because you're £50 million doesn't mean you develop superpowers and you can start defending as two people and you could duplicate yourself. We're not an advertisement here. We're playing real life football. We're not playing FIFA where you can start duplicating and becoming 10 people and not only block the man that you're meant to block, but also block the man who's coming in for the goal. So that's kind of where my issue came in to begin with there. I think Ben White overall, firstly, I said it in the chat as well, he's been the perfect sweeper, which is exactly what we signed. Because every time he got the ball, not only did he get the ball, he won it, but then also was able to springboard an attack because he won it, but kept the ball on his feet and was able to make a pass. That's what we signed him to do. And I think people forget why he's in this team. It's to cover for Gabriel's lack of ability to progress the ball. He's gotten better this season, but obviously when we look at him before this season, I'm not going to sit here and say he was a ball-playing centre-back. He just wasn't. So I think he's been fine. I don't think I've got any issues. And I think aerially as well, he's been fine. So he's not only proving those areas wrong, but he's also kind of proving to people actually there's more to his game than people are letting on to. And it's also the fact that he said he didn't watch football when he was young, but I don't really recall a lot of people watching. Yes, they may know the club better, but they don't sit there and watch football because guess what? They're actually having to play football. They've got tournament football on the weekends. They've got training during the week. The last thing you're really going to do is come home and tune into football. Like, you get sick of it after a bit. And I know that sounds wrong because it's your profession. But let's be honest, don't we get sick of our own professions as much as it's a hobby and an interest for us? We also get sick of it. Sometimes we're like, I want to break from this. So I think it's all of them accumulatively, and then they see the fact that we drew and they conceded two, and Ben White happened to. He's not even at the fault, but in their heads, he's at the fault of one of them. Just like, oh yeah, let's just blame Ben White because it's easy to do, rather than let's be clever about this and actually look at what the problem was.
Yeah, for sure. And I think Ben White is somebody who I think is growing game by game. And just because the performances of the team have been great, you can't really see it. But I did see it in this game. And again, you guys, I just think you guys are running into roadblocks here when you guys are trying to. I mean, I'm not speculating on the fact that the team is not listening to Arteta because he comes into press conferences and says that I told them to do this and they're basically not doing that. So
Lacazette admitted it after the West
that's
Ham 3-3.
yeah, that's not speculation. That's exactly what's happening. And if you're telling a team to do something and they're not doing it, then you're not influencing them to do it. Do you believe Klopp always has to get his players up for a game, or do you think that they've grown so much in confidence and belief that being brave is a given and not being see? And this is the thing: you guys are thinking that Arteta needs to get them in a room together every single game and get them up. When I say you influence a team, that happens on the training pitch. That's about giving them confidence in their position when they're on the pitch, and then them getting results, and then them believing in the system based on that. Arteta doesn't have that part of it where they go out on the pitch, they're confident in what they're doing, they get the result, and then they replicate it the next day. He's continuously, by his own inability to, I don't know, do whatever, but he continuously puts players in bad positions. They get bad results, and then he tells them to do it again next week. That doesn't breed confidence. When you believe in what somebody is telling you because the results back it up, then you do it because you know that that's what's best for you because you have something to back it up. And so I'm not saying that Arteta needs to sit in a room and get them up for every single game like a cup final. But what I'm saying is influence is not just sitting in a room and telling them what to do. It's giving them the confidence based on results. And I don't think he's done that. Now, are they down tooling on him? There is a big gap and a range of things that players can do beyond. It's not just, oh, well, if they're playing and they're not down tooling, then he's influencing them and they're fine. They're not running through walls for him. That's clear. They're doing things there, but they're not really doing everything that he's asking, which says to me that he's weak in his leadership. And if you're telling me that every single player that we've pretty much bought since Arteta has been here are all weak-minded and none of them are brave because they're not showing it on the pitch, then that goes back to Arteta as well because he picks the players. So you guys are just running back into walls. Like, what I'm seeing with my eyes and what I know about leadership, and when you watch Klopp, when you watch Pep, and a lot of the confidence comes from results repeated because they've done what he's asked. When they're doing what Arteta's asking them to do, they're not getting the results. So they're questioning it. That's what it looks like to me. I don't know, you guys. I don't know where it's coming from, where this whole, oh, you're muted, but I don't know where it's coming from, where you guys are seeing a team that when he's legitimately telling you that they're not doing what he's saying, and you look at the team and you say, well, it's their fault, when it's literally his job to influence them to do what he thinks is best. And the only way to do that is to do it with results. You have to have results to back it up. And he doesn't have that.
But you know what it is? You know, like you said, obviously, even in his press conference, he admits that players aren't doing what he's saying. What I would do if I was a manager, forget about even being a football manager for a second, but just a manager in general. If, let's say, my team of people are confused by what I'm asking of them, what I would do is sit there and go, okay, what's making you confused? What aren't you understanding? Like, let's dumb it, or not even dumb it down. I think that's a bit rude to say, but let me try and explain it in a different way. But if week on week you're constantly saying the same thing where the players don't understand what I'm saying to them, then clearly you're not explaining it properly. And that's not going to breed confidence. And I do agree with that aspect of what you're saying, Jess, because for me, it's like, well, if the players are confused, and explain it to them in a different way. And if they can't understand it, then guess what? You're doing something that doesn't make sense to anyone but yourself. So you need to find another way of coaching. You need to find another way of maybe delivering them tactics, and you need to maybe simplify it. And that's kind of why the confusions comes in, because I think his ideas are complicated and only he understands them, but I don't think he knows how to deliver them.
Yeah, the results, I mean, when you get results, then people start believing in what you're saying, and I just don't think that that's there. So, yeah, we should well, I think if you don't believe it now, that's perfectly fine, but if we keep going through these games, which we'll talk about the next 3 games, and he's keeps coming and saying that they're not brave enough, well, that's your freaking job, is to get them to be brave. That is a part of his job, and we can't continuously look at the players when it's, you know what I mean? But I wrote some things down, just some of my thoughts on how I'm feeling right now. So I'll just kind of like read them out, because you guys, I was up late. That's why I look like this, because I'm like, I was just, I don't know how to feel about this team right now. So for me, like, when the entire team is underperforming or out of form, you have to kind of look at the manager. And when you play against Brighton and Palace, et cetera, and our quality doesn't really stand out, it's kind of worrying. And even if we're playing poorly, we should look like the better team. And I feel like if you were a novice and you'd never really watched Arsenal play before, any Premier League team play before, and you looked at Crystal Palace versus Arsenal and Arsenal versus Brighton, you probably wouldn't have picked us to be the team that should have won on paper. These games are really, really even. And this is a team that's unable, like, to get ticking consistently. When key players are missing from the system, he doesn't try to bubble wrap our weak areas or make them like make like for like swaps. He opts to change the system and play our best players out of position and leave them exposed. It's been 20 months, about 30 transfers, and a team full of players that either brought in or re-signed. There's no Guendouzi, no Saliba, no Mustafi, Luiz, Ozil, Bellerin, Torreira to blame for any cultural or playing issues. And we're still not seeing a team that looks ready to compete for Europe. I'm not saying it's not capable, but I just don't think it's ready to compete. We're out of Europe because of some of these same mistakes from last season. And he had 5 days to prepare for Brighton, 13 to prepare for Palace, and we still drop points. And these next 3 games feel really heavy for me, because once we get to that 10th game, things really firm up and solidify in the league. And our schedule also gets a lot more difficult. If we finish these next 3 games without the 9 points, I feel like we could be trapped in mid-table. And we're going into that next international break, potentially in the thick of another Arteta out movement, which would be perfect timing for the media, since the last break was kind of boring. And at the end of this run, for me, I'll know exactly where I stand. Unless we put together a run of consistent performances, get 3 positive results, and the players are in the right position and look like a team that can compete for Europe, I kind of feel like I'm done with the Arteta thing. And we cannot be on the second page after this run of fixtures. So for me, that's kind of just where I am. That's my bottom line, and I won't go back on it. Looking forward to Villa, Leicester, and Watford. What do you expect from these next 3 games?
Villa, what was it? Villa, Watford, and
Villa at home, Leicester away, and Watford at home.
in terms of points, or what do I expect in terms? I
I mean,
actually
it's
don't
it's
even
both.
know.
It's both. Like, these games feel really important. I mean, they probably won't sack him,
What I
but for
expect
me,
is 9 points now, because obviously we dropped points against Palace and Brighton, so we need to make up
yeah,
for it somehow. Um,
yeah,
I think beating Villa would make a statement that, okay, maybe he's rectified from last season. So if he beats
hmm
them, I'll be like, okay, maybe from last season he's learned what he did wrong. He needs to beat Leicester because that's what he did last season. So do it again, because they are in bad form. Um, Watford we should be beating, because you lost to Brentford, to at least beat one of the promoted sides in one of the first coming legs. So I think he needs. For me, I want 9 out of 9. I'm not. I know that sounds harsh and that's unrealistic, but what I reckon will happen is we'll lose to Villa, and that sounds crazy, but I reckon we lose to Villa. We beat Leicester. No, we draw to Leicester, and we probably beat Watford. That's what I realistically think will happen.
yeah. I mean, it's not looking great, and I think I want to be more like, but this team is so inconsistent. And I don't know, like, you had 5 games to prepare for Brighton, 5 days, 13 days to prepare for Palace, and we still got similar results. So I don't know if, 4 days will give you enough time, but he's not really getting it right. And I can't look at this team and say it's them. I really think it's the coaching, the management, the system, and his inability to make changes and make the right decisions to get results when things are not perfect. So do the performances really matter, or are we at the point where he just needs to get the results? Because I mean, before it was kind of like, well, if we see the performances and he drops points, then it's different. But we haven't seen performances, we drop points, and really the Brentford match, Palace and Brighton have really hurt us in terms of us jumping up the table. Is it kind of like just shut up and win? Or if we were to play really well against Leicester and drop points, like, and lose the game, would you feel like that's okay? Or where are you kind of at with it?
If he plays the right team with the right balance and we lose and we put in a good performance, I'll be like, okay, at least he thought about this properly. But if he makes the same mistakes where he's going with single pivot, so he's playing the Conga party, for me, I'm gonna start cutting the like. It's got to be over for me because you're now dropping points because you're naive to understand that your team doesn't work or what you're trying to do with La Conga Partey or with a single pivot against a midfield that's going to work hard does not work yet. Like you don't have the right players. And that to me becomes more of a you don't know your squad issue more than you're not getting the results on the pitch. And I've said it, like he just needs to rectify his issues and mistakes that he's making more than anything. And that's all I want to see. Because look, you sometimes, you know what, you can get unlucky and just lose a game that you didn't deserve to lose. And if that is the case, and I really think that, and I think I know unanimously will never, ever, ever as a fan base think that because people are just going to be like, well, he lost. And I don't care.
Hmm.
He lost. So, and I think that's what the state we're in. But if we're being realistic and we're all like, okay, you know what? That was hard done. Like a silly pen, like for example, the Wolves game. But let's say Leno didn't get that red card, but it was just the David Luiz situation that happened. I would be like, okay, you know what? That's what can you do? Like, if because that's not a red card. Do you know what I mean? If something like
Hmm.
that happens, I'll be like, okay, you know what? Like, what the hell can you do? Because you got a red card when you shouldn't have got a red card, and things you scored early, but then things just kind of went tipsy up for you. Then I'll be like, okay, I'll hold my hand and go, okay, I can let you have a pass on that, but I want to see the mistakes that you're making rectified first.
Yeah, for sure. I do think that yeah, he needs to fix those mistakes and things would get better. But although, again, I want to be more specific that, like, when he doesn't fix those things, they are his fault,
Yeah,
and so they
100%.
just aren't things in the ether, you know what I mean? But yeah, out of Martinelli, Lacazette, and Aubameyang, who keeps their spot?
Ooh.
They all put in really good performances, and it's kind of like seeing those three players play the way that they did. I think the reactionary thing is to say, well, just play Aubameyang and Lacazette together and just move on. But I do think that there's an element of playing Martinelli as well, but you don't want to drop Aubameyang. But do you play Aubameyang and Martinelli together? So you kind of have, but this thing going on. But for you, just on against Villa, like, what does your front kind of four look like after
And,
this
and I,
last game?
I know Aubameyang Lacazette did well to get the goal. I get that, but I don't like them over a 90-minute period. I don't think they complement each other in the 4-2-3-1. So
Mhm.
what I would like to see is Martinelli, Aubameyang, Saka with ESR in behind. That's what I would
Mhm.
like to see. I don't think he would ever do that. That's way too handbrakes off for him. And yeah, that's my front. If I got to pick, what would you do?
I'm leaning towards Martinelli, Lacazette, Saka, ESR and behind, because personally I think Lacazette and ESR is a better combination than anything else. I think those two play really well off of each other. And then Saka and Martinelli can take care of the scoring aspect of things. But I think it's harsh to drop Aubameyang. But the only reason why I'd be keeping in there is because of performance and not because I think it's the best combination, but I want to acknowledge that as well. So yeah, it would be something of that sort. But the thing that I kind of want to leave you guys with before we get out of here is that, you know, these guys have all signed for Arteta. So it's not that they don't like him or anything like that. He was able to convince a lot of players to re-sign and to come to Arsenal for this project. And so I don't think that they're downing tools on him. I think that they're playing hard. I think that they're doing as much as they can do with the circumstance that they're in. But what I will say is that when you look at a team like Chelsea that had Lampard at the reign, and they had a bunch of good players, some of whom had signed while Lampard was there. They signed Havertz while he was there, Ziyech while he was there. So these players inevitably signed up for the Lampard project. And although that they weren't sitting on the pitch and actively down tools, you could tell that the team was not getting the most. He wasn't getting the most out of that group. And all it took was another team with some younger players that were ready to run and fight to beat them. And we're kind of in that same position where if a team that cares to fight and press and stuff will beat us, you know? And it wasn't until Tuchel came in where people kind of got it together and got it through their minds that although they weren't sitting on the pitch, with pitchforks or pitch it, the little poster saying Lampard out, that didn't necessarily mean that they were getting the most out of them. That didn't necessarily mean that they were doing the most that they could possibly do. I do think another manager gets more out of this group. I do think Arteta's inexperience is hurting the team. He has 3 more games in my mind to change that
So what
around.
kind of manager would you like? What's your if you
That
could pick? If you
I
could pick.
I think that's a conversation for the international break coming up, because after those 3 games, we'll go into another international break. We may not even have to have this conversation because maybe he turns this around. But for me, I just feel like if you look at somebody like a Ten Hag, that's probably somebody who you'd want to try to look at this point. But other than that, we're kind of far away from that. But what I'm saying is that you may think that this is fine until you get on the other side. And even though they're doing well and you can't really say that they're sitting on the ground not playing hard, we're not getting the most out of them. And that's because of Arteta. And I'm tired of blaming the players. So there's about 88 of you guys watching on all platforms. Make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel. Try to fit in a show tomorrow. If not, Thursday, we'll just go straight into match preview for Arsenal versus Aston Villa, and then just keep going from there. And yeah, so this was a fun one. I know it wasn't like, oh my gosh, it's so great, we won a game, but at least we talked about so many different things. And it's the Arsenal, so we signed up for this. So consider sharing this with a friend. Consider becoming a member. Let us know in the comments what you thought about the conversation, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Bye, guys.